morning, everyone. Who's ready for 10 tips you can use today to get rich? Cool. So, cross-browser browser extensions. That's our talk today. I'm Potch, Matt Claypotch. Go by Potch. There are 100 million Matts. I have been at Mozilla, where I've been a developer advocate for 3 years, but I've been at Mozilla for 8 years, which in tech years is 100,000 years. You may know me as the creator of DoesHoneyBadgerCare.com. I work for Mozilla. We are a nonprofit who makes a product you may have heard of called Firefox. We are committed to an independent and open web, and we've been doing that for quite some time, 20 some odd years. If you haven't used Firefox recently, try it. There. Now I've done my job. The rest of this is just gravy. Cool. So I am here today to talk to you about cross-browser browser extensions. So we're going to start with the eighth grade book report version of this, which is, what is an extension? An extension is a bundle of code and data that modifies or augments the functionality of a piece of software. That's so generic as to be useless, but we can compare and contrast to other things to learn a little bit more. What's an extension versus what's a plugin? A plugin is a thing that doesn't exist anymore, but you may have Flash on your system, which is sort of the last remaining plugin. Plugins provide sort of extra capabilities to a browser, but they act in a way that's completely disjoint from the browser. The browser goes, hey, here's a rectangle on the screen. You can use that, and we'll leave you alone. And they say, great, I'm going to overrun my buffers and compromise your browser. And that's how plugins work. So not to be confused with extensions. And extensions versus add-ons. For the longest time at Mozilla, we have sort of referred to extensions as add-ons. And we use that as this big catch-all term, because we also use the word themes, which is ways to visually change the browser, or dictionaries, or language packs, and all those things. So really, if you ever hear me say add-on instead of extension, I kind of usually just mean extension, but extensions are a subset of add-ons. As you can see from that subset symbol, I have read math ever. So we're going to start with a brief history of extensions, just to tell you how we got to where we are today. Spoiler, today we got to a pretty cool place, but as with all things with the web, I want you really to be excited for 18 months from now or 2 years from now. But I'm here to get people already curious and excited about extensions so they can start playing with things as the ecosystem matures. So a brief history of extensions. Fun fact, not Opera, but Internet Explorer had extensions first. Granted, they were ActiveX plugins, and they took a form of COM codes. They're really C++ bundles that you attach to IE. But if you ever used a computer with 12 toolbars, those are extensions. So really, in 1999, IE5 actually broke the ground here and said, we are going to allow extensibility in the browser. It turns out the browser is a pretty cool thing. We haven't decided to commit antitrust yet, but we're about to. So first, we're in the extend phase of embrace, extend, extinguish. And so extensions were born. Not to be outdone, 5 years later, the Mozilla project, which formed out of the ashes of Netscape, fun fact, there's still Netscape code in Firefox, the good stuff that's left behind, all the bad stuff's been replaced. And the Mozilla project had this big monolithic suite that was a mail browser and a composer and all of these things. And someone in there was like, what if we just shipped a good web browser? So they took the Mozilla suite and they took all the stuff that wasn't the browser out, and they made this thing called Firefox, and that came out in 2004. And in the Mozilla suite, there was a concept of extensions. So in version 1 of Firefox, there was a concept of extensions. Opera, 5 years later after that, in their version 10, so this is Opera in the Presto era still, they released a model for extensions. Right behind them, 2 years after their launch, Google Chrome. Remember when the Chrome icon was shiny? I just really like that. I mean, it looks a little bit more GLaDOS, but it's also like, I know, I miss the skeuomorphic icons. They released their extension model. This is sort of actually a really important moment in extensions, and you're going to see why in a little bit. Also in 2010, Safari had actually released their own version of extensions, which is really not dissimilar to Chrome's version. And we're going to touch upon that again a bit more later as well. So first, we're going to talk about in detail Firefox extensions, and that's because I work for Mozilla, and that's literally my job, is to talk to you about Firefox extensions. I also think they've come the furthest, apart from perhaps sort of the IE to Edge transition. Firefox extensions, I think, have come probably the furthest from what they were to what they are. So, Firefox 1. It's fun fact. To this day, news outlets just use this version of the Firefox logo, which was drawn, I think, on a napkin. No offense to the original drawers, but you know, it has a certain 2004 je ne sais quoi to it. I registered firefoxlogo.com so people can find the good version. Anyway, Firefox 1 had extensions, but how did they work? They used something called Zool. Quick show of hands if you've ever heard of Zool or used Zool on purpose. Okay, Zool was super cool, right? This is 2004. XML is going to save the web. XHTML is where we're going. I picked up my O'Reilly copy of the XSLT handbook because that was where we were headed. Everyone loved making a small mistake and getting a yellow screen instead of a web page. So we were so jazzed by that. XML is the future. Why not build not just the web pages in XML, but actually the entire user interface of the browser in XML, which is actually true to this day. We're slowly working to fix that. But the entire interface of Firefox is actually rendered by a web renderer that knows how to use XML and XSLT and things like that. So the Firefox UI is actually a web page, sort of. And then it uses that same engine to render the web pages themselves. And it's powered by Zool. And Zool stands for XML User Interface Language. So it's the extensible markup language user interface language. And this allows you to define actually relatively sophisticated kind of early web component things. They're super neat. There's a binding language. You define all this behavior, and you can define this behavior in C++ and JavaScript, and define a structure in XML, and then apply it to a page using CSS. You say, like, the behavior of this element in CSS is defined by this C++ file. Super wacky, totally works, but a little stale. And so extensions work the same way. When you wanted to extend Firefox, you provided a bundle of Zool, and that bundle of Zool was roughly structured the same way the browser was, right? If you wanted to change the skin of the browser, you put some files in a folder called skin. It looked a little bit like almost like the modding community. And in fact, it was really just a big stack of patches, monkey patches. So you had the browser, and then an extension, and then another extension that may have been dimly aware that the other extension exists. Maybe they touched two different parts of the browser. And then another extension. And this diagram sort of shows what might happen in that situation. And the answer is they're going to stomp all over each other, right? Unless you know how to behave, unless you know how to cooperate, you're going to redefine a method that another was already redefined, and maybe you didn't alias the most recent version, et cetera. And you got a lot of brittle, flaky, crashy, buggy extensions. But we had extensions. And extensions actually, in the early 2000s, were one of the defining things about Firefox, right? Ad blockers and user scripts and Grease Monkey. And it was a really, really awesome time. And people had figured out how to tame these sort of grody extensions that could do anything but didn't really know how to behave. So we had phenomenal cosmic power. It's not, I love Aladdin, but unfortunately, it's whether you want it or not. No matter how simple your extension was, maybe your extension just turned the word cloud to but, right? Doesn't matter, you still could invoke all of the C++ powers of Firefox and rm-rf the entire user hard drive, because maybe you were executing the word but as opposed to just replacing it. So really kind of dangerous. And fortunately, it was the naive era of the early 2000s, right? And so we weren't exploiting literally everything we possibly could yet. And we survived with this model for a long time without severe security problems. Safe. Fortunately, in the year 2010, inspired by some of the other SDK work that was coming out of other browsers for building extensions that sort of looked like JavaScript and looked like something that web developers could use, we launched, originally called Jetpack, and then became called the add-ons SDK, and originally launched in 2010. Any of you familiar with that? Okay, cool. One woo, perfect. Good news, I'm here to explain it. So the SDK was informed and influenced by everything that had happened on the web since 2004, the explosion of Ajax, event models, all this wonderful stuff, as well as these other extension models. So it had an API surface, right? We weren't just stomping over everything. You could actually have there's a specific endpoint for messing with tabs and a specific endpoint for, maybe opening a port to another process on your computer. And it was really well defined. And then it wasn't really updated, right? We're like, we did it. We shipped an API, and we were really, really slow to ship incremental updates to the API that kept up with the times. This was what happens when you have a labs team, and then you disband the labs team after you've shipped. It was just sort of a shame. I don't want to denigrate my colleagues, but we sort of, from the position of 2018, can look back and go like, oh yeah, okay, we could have done that better. And so we had this wonderful API surface, which was miles ahead of where we had been. And then we had this function called components.utilities.import. And this was phenomenal cosmic power. This would let you pull in all of the abilities that Zuul add-ons had, all of them. So you had this nice little componentized API surface bundle that you could reason about, and then they could construct a call to cu.import and do anything they wanted again. Which meant that we didn't necessarily have to update the APIs, because people could just pull in the superpowers they needed as opposed to getting an API. However, once again, phenomenal cosmic powers, whether you want them or not, and whether you know how to use them safely or not. Sort of the discussion of safety in computer programming is a thing we talk about all the time now, but back then it was still sort of assumed that you would just, we'll just write safe code. It'll be fine. Meanwhile, like I said, Chrome had shipped its extension API. And Chrome extensions, how many of you have written or used a Chrome extension? Yeah, okay, cool. They are based on HTML. They use CSS and JavaScript. Web technology, which is great because web developers are probably the most common implementers of extensions. In the early days, it seemed like maybe browser makers were going to be able to do extensions. And then it was like, oh, no, wait, web developers are the audience we're looking for. More importantly, permissions. So you couldn't just invoke superpowers when you wanted them. If you wanted to be able to capture the page at install time, you had to say, I'm going to use this superpower that lets me take a picture of the page. And so maybe the user is prompted about that, maybe they're not. But if later on someone compromises your extension and wants to capture the page, if it's not a feature of the extension, it doesn't happen. The API is either not there or errors out, and you are protected from malicious behavior because you sort of whitelist up front, say, here are all the things that I'm going to do. If you've ever installed an Android application, you get that big, long list, and you go, sure, whatever. And that's the same model, right? It does lead to people asking for everything up front, and that can be sort of a messy UX situation where users aren't properly informed of what they're consenting to. But compared to, I have this special plug that lets me do whatever I want, way, way better. And so in the year 2018, now with our updated logos, Chrome and Opera and Brave and Beaker and Chromium-based browsers in general, I'm going to use Chrome and Opera as the representatives of those. My apologies if your favorite is not there, were the beneficiaries. So, 2015. We published a blog post called The Future of Developing Firefox Add-ons. Remember, add-ons means extensions in this situation. And we were implementing a new extension API called Web Extensions, largely compatible with the model used by Chrome and Opera to make it easier to develop extensions across multiple browsers. So yeah, like we decided that we were going to adopt another browser's extension model. How many of you knew that Firefox uses Chrome's extension model? Yeah, cool. So this is, once again, doing my job. My boss can be very satisfied here. So now we have extensions that can run in these two places and here. Then we, along with a couple other parties, went to the W3C and said, hey, what if there was an API surface for extensions that was standardized the same way there are API surfaces for the web that are standardized? And we sort of haven't made a ton of progress here. However, the browser extension community group was founded with the goal of creating a cross-browser set of APIs for building browser extensions, sort of a browser-level version of web APIs. And then Edge came on the scene, and they were like, Microsoft Edge extensions, which are different from IE extensions. And they also adapted a model based on this nebulous notion of these cross-browser browser extensions. So now we have extensions that work in these places. So that's where we are, the present day. We have these extensions called browser extensions or web extensions or just extensions. It's hard to say. Maybe you just call them Chrome extensions. And they have this architecture. This is the most detailed image in the entire slide deck. But if you can kind of see, we've got a manifest, and that manifest says, here's everything I can do. And then a big list of things you can do. You can spawn background scripts and content scripts and browser actions, which are the buttons in your toolbar, and page actions, which interact with on the page you're looking at, and option pages, which give you preferences UI, and then you can actually manipulate web pages themselves and make resources they can access. Manifest looks a little bit like this. It's a JSON file that just lists, if you've ever seen a package JSON or an app manifest, these will look very, very, very familiar. We've gotten to manifest version 2, and we'll probably be at version 2 forever. But you define a bunch of properties about your extension. Sure, name, what it does, who you are, and then you define all of your capabilities, right? You say, I have a background page that lives here in this file. I request the following permissions. These permissions apply to the following regex on URLs. So you could even say, I don't want to activate for evil.com. I want to activate for my website.biz. And then you have the scripts themselves. I'm going to show you the fancy ES6y version of this. But you can, within a script, actually invoke these APIs. So this one's actually looking for, if a user clicks the button on the page or in the browser, when you install an extension, you get those little buttons that populate, and then you have too many of them, you drag them off. Those actions all can be listened to, and then you can see I'm manipulating tabs right now. So I'm creating a tab, goes to example.org, and then, which I actually don't know if example.org is safe and registered. I know .com is. May I fix that? And then we can actually go run scripts, injecting them into those tabs, or we can load other scripts from a well-defined URL and load them into those tabs, or mess with that tab, or whatever, right? In this one, if someone clicks the button, I open a new tab, and I go extract the text content of the first header on that page, and actually can extract it from the page and bring it back to my extension. Which goes, I keep talking about background pages and things like that. These extension APIs, while awesome, sort of just predate the idea of workers. Right now we have service workers and page workers and shared workers and audio worklets and paint worklets and all these things. And all of that technology and all that idea of a sort of DOM-free thread just post-dates the creation of these extension APIs. So we actually have the concept of pages versus workers. And what that means is that when your background script is running, it's actually running in the context of a web page that isn't loaded in a tab. It's just sort of a virtual web page that has a bunch of script tags in it. The advantage of this is you get access to every single DOM API, right? So which is very, very valuable. You have access to fetch. You can assume that if you can do it from a web page, you can do it from an extension. The downside is it's a little clumsier. You have to worry about the overhead of knowing, that you share this shared global window object and things like that. So, in a manifest, you might see something that looks like this, where you say polyfill and then a background. Or you can actually just say, hey, go use this page. And a page effectively looks like this. It's a very, very short stub. A lot of times you just see script tags. People omit everything else because they don't actually care. And you get these scripts loaded. This doesn't look valuable at all. However, you can immediately take advantage of things that web pages can do. So in the intervening time, we now have ES6 modules, right? And if you're building a browser extension, you know it's going to run in a browser, and you know which browser it's going to run in. So maybe you can do something like this. And you can load a polyfill, and you can load a DOM library, maybe jQuery, maybe something else, and you can actually do some computation on some DOM object. Maybe you have template tags in there, and you're pulling in template information. And you can use ES6 modules, right? So this way, you can say, as opposed to just loading a static background script, pretend it's a script, actually do a script type module, and now you have access to ES modules within extensions, and we're nice and modern, and it's way, way more pleasant to use. Speaking of modernity and pleasantness to use, that's gotten way bigger than I anticipated. All right, slides. That's what happens when you make a diagram like 5 minutes before your presentation. This is sort of a lightweight architecture here. The background script the background page acts as the core of an extension. Sure, the manifest starts everything up, but if you need to coordinate between a script injected into a page, and a DevTools panel, and the button on the page, and maybe a panel that tips down out of that, and a sidebar, and an options page, because you want to use every single feature at the exact same time. You can do that, but you need to coordinate via the background script. And so there's this notion of opening ports. It's not networking ports. It's the same port that a worker would have or an iframe has, right? So you have a post message channel, and you can say, hey, I want to talk, I want to open a port from my content script back to my background process. I want to open a port from my DevTools panel back to my background script. And I want to open a browser action port. And all these little ports all let you just do message passing just like you would with workers, and you can coordinate and sort of respond. You can even do kind of a Reduxy pattern where everyone's sending their changes back to the background page, and the background page is the source of truth, and that maintains the state of your extension. It ultimately makes a pretty nice architecture. So this slide, I don't know if you can see these two little lines at the bottom of one of those is my time, and one of those is my slides. So you can see the blue line is just advancing inerexibly forward, even as I waste time explaining it to you. And the other slide is where I am in my slides, but it counts sub-slides, which means that this slide is my, I'm moving way faster or slower than I need to slide. This is a good tip for everyone who wants to make slides. So this is an exhaustive list of every currently supported API. I'm not actually going to read them out to you, or am I? Alarms, bookmarks, browser action, browser settings, browser data, clipboard, commands, content scripts, contextual identities, cookies, DevTools inspected window, DevTools network, DevTools panels, DNS, downloads, events, extension types, find, history, I18N, identity, idle management menus, notifications, Omnibox, page action, permissions, PKCS11, privacy, proxy, runtime, search, sessions, sidebar action, storage, tabs, theme, top sites, times, web navigation, web request, and Windows. And now I'm ahead of time. Right? Feels real good. So, so you're saying to yourself, this is wonderful. I can do all of these things and all browsers that support extensions. Oh my gosh, I did not know this. Well, not really. This is really the current state of the world. Also, this is, I realized right before my talk that this is a lesson about how Potch is bad at Venn diagrams and should never do them again. Because it looks like they share nothing. But really, I meant to label the circles. So I'm never going to, yeah, this is the last Venn diagram you'll ever see from me. This green circle is Firefox. Firefox loves green. This red circle is Chrome and Opera, and the blue circle is Edge. And in reality, you know, also the problem with real Venn diagrams is the actual overlap here is 90%, right? It's not 0%. They share a lot of the same common core, and their extensions or their extension capabilities that exist in one browser and no others, and two browsers and no others, et cetera. However, this may look a lot like the web, right? If I pulled this up and said, here's what web pages can do, and pulled up this exact same slide, you'd say, I agree. And so, in the words of Steve Jobs, what do you do about this? Well, we have a really sweet solution for you. Feature detection. And that's the truth, right? The one bond we as browser vendors make to you is if a key's there, you should be able to use it, right? If it's not there, it's not there. We try not to throw a not implemented error. We try to make it say, right, if this API exists in this namespace, then you can use it. Of course, you know, we're flawed human beings. You know, pity us, the web browser makers. So here's where we are. If you use, largely speaking, the Chrome dot versions of extension APIs, everyone, because compatibility is the new Glasnost, will support it, right? So if you say Chrome dot, Edge and Firefox will be like, we know what you mean. It's cool. It's fine. Not a problem. However, we've also renamed that entire namespace to browser dot. You can see that, of course, Chrome has no idea what we're talking about at the moment. We're still hanging out, chatting, see what's going on. And the spec actually defines all of these APIs to go from a callback model to a promise-based model, which is super rad. However, only Firefox does this at the moment. Edge initially closed the bug that said they didn't support promises as works as intended, but they've reopened it because Edge is super, super awesome at responding to user feedback. And obviously, we're working all this out when we'd love to even get Chrome's extension model updated to support promises so we can write pretty async await and modularly looking things. However, there's a polyfill called the web extension polyfill. And this will go back and go into Chrome and say, hey, all those callback-based extensions that are on the Chrome dot, we're going to polyfill all of those to be promise-based on the browser dot. Edge, however, we forgot to say that, right, Edge does support Chrome dot, but when we detect browser dot, but we assume it's promises, and yeah, we're fixing it. OK, so that's 100% of absolutely everything that I have to say about extensions. There's absolutely nothing else to cover. So in 2010, version 5 of Safari launched support for extensions. And they actually did a really, really, really good job. What they didn't do was get a massive market-dominating market share that made everyone use their model. This is not their fault, to the extent that it's anyone's fault. And Safari has a really cool JavaScript, CSS, HTML extension API that's based on the idea of pages versus workers. And really, but it's a completely independent, parallel evolution. So now we have something that looks like this, but this isn't APIs, this is capabilities, right? If you want to mess with tabs, you can. It just looks a little different. It looks completely different, but it's possible, all right? So now it's safari.self.browserwindow.openTab versus browser.tabs.create. But you could see that if you took a look at this capability layer and said, oh, we can write a driver that speaks Safari, and you absolutely can. That's a future-looking thing that I'm describing to you, and none of you should go looking for today. Cool? We all cool? We're all excited about the future, right? The future is amazing. Cool. So today, what are we doing today? We're going to start building extensions, every single one of us. Lock the doors. Mozilla offers a tool called web-ext, which comes from when we called the API web extensions. It's a super nice command line tool, lets you scaffold, lets you lint, lets you launch a browser and do live coding where the extension auto reloads in the browser. It's super fancy. Chrome and Edge and Firefox all support what's called temporary or unpacked extension loading, where you say this folder over here is an extension, and as long as you're a developer, the browser says, I believe you, and runs it. And then you can do live updating or go hit a reload button and actually start building these extensions and experimenting with what works and what doesn't and where the edge cases are. Or if you've already built an extension, probably for Chrome, you can port. If you have a browser or extension that works in Chrome, it will 99.9% work in Firefox. It will 68.4% work in Edge. But the only way to do it is to try. So we have a tool called extensiontest.com. It takes a CRX file. You don't even have to give it this code, just a packed CRX file. It opens it up. It runs a compatibility suite against it, just statically analyzes for API usage and goes, cool, you use the following 4 APIs that don't work in Firefox, or hey, this totally works, and you should just go submit it to us. Where I wrote this tool. It's entirely on me. If it doesn't work, you can come find me. And I'm also working on adding Edge compatibility data, so it will say, yes, this should definitely work in Firefox, and yes, this should definitely work in Edge, as opposed to just Firefox. So yeah, today you can do that. Also, you can complain. I genuinely mean this. I'm a developer advocate. My job is not to market to you, but to listen to you. If I come back and say, my talk went great, I did not do my job. But if I came back and say, on the first day of JSConf in the morning, told everyone that I know about extensions that you should complain to me, and then you all find me during this week and talk to me about whether you've tried to build an extension and it went horribly wrong, or what the heck were you thinking, or why is this all so terrible? I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to come back. And all this stuff is actually in flux, right? Firefox has a fully staffed, we're hiring engineering team working on extensions and extension APIs. We think it's one of the ways that users can take a browser and make it theirs and have agency over the web. And it's super important to us that users be able to do that, because we believe that we are a user agent and not a publisher or government agent. So you have to find me and tell me what's terrible so I can make it less terrible. If you want to find me in person, I am at Potch. And that's actually the end of the talk. So you can read, there's a huge, huge table on MDN that has all of the API compatibility. There's all these tools. Find me. We publish stuff on our Hacks blog. And these slides will be available at that URL. Thank you very much for your time.